She used to borrow my lawn clippers every second Sunday. That's how it started, just a knock on the fence, a smile through the slats, a purple blouse fluttering like it didn't care about rules. Diane. Retired schoolteacher. Widow. Liked jazz on low volume and said things like, "The lilacs are having a rough week." I used to think we were friends. Or maybe more like old comrades in the great suburban détente. People who chose silence over small talk, fences over confrontation. Until the rules began to talk louder than us. Until her voice came not through the slats in my fence, but from the bullhorn of a meeting room. But that's later. You should know how this really began. Have you ever watched peace dissolve not in one great fight, but in a series of perfectly reasonable steps? When did the quiet kindness of a neighborhood become a battleground? What side of the fence were you on when it happened? The neighborhood was called Greendale Crossing, a name someone must have paid a branding firm $12,000 to invent. The irony wasn't lost on me. We had no crossings. Only cul-de-sac. Circles. Loops of quiet desperation hidden behind uniform hedges and blue recycling bins. But when I first moved here in 1994, I didn't think of that. I thought of trees, safety, and clean sidewalks. I thought of Margaret, my wife. She was still alive then, and we'd just retired from our jobs in Milwaukee. I'd been an engineer for 42 years. She taught piano. We wanted a quiet place to grow old plant tulips, maybe read more than we had during the years of raising David and negotiating 401(k)s. We chose Greendale because it looked like America had promised, safe, quiet, polite. That's what I thought until the day the HOA sent out its third quarterly newsletter, Reminders for Visual Harmony, and included a clause about unauthorized decorations. I'd put a birdbath in the corner of my yard, a gift from my grandson. They said it was non-conforming. I laughed. Then I took it down. I didn't want trouble. I was still polite then. I didn't know what was beginning. Back then, Diane was the kind of neighbor who left cookies on your doorstep and never asked if you voted red or blue. We talked about squirrels and lawn fertilizer. She called me Walt. I called her D. There was something about growing older that made us both softer, and in those early years, I saw her as something steady in the turning wheel of time. After Margaret died in 2008, Diane was the first person to bring over casserole. She didn't speak, just handed it to me with a paper napkin and said, "Warm it up when you're ready. No rush." That night, I sat in silence, eating lukewarm green bean mush, and thinking about how grief always hides in domestic gestures. For the next few years, we became, I don't know what the word is, companions of proximity, perhaps. She walked her dog past my porch each morning. Sometimes we'd sit on the steps and talk about nothing. Other times she'd talk about her arthritis, her memories of teaching third grade, or her daughter who never called anymore. I listened. I offered coffee. She declined. We were old people growing older, quietly, kindly, until someone knocked on her door one evening and asked if she'd consider running for the HOA board. I said yes, she told me the next day, smiling with a kind of pride that made my coffee go cold. They said I've got a good sense of order. I should have heard the tremor in that word, order. But I didn't. I congratulated her. That was my mistake. You never congratulate a person for stepping into the machine. The first signs were small. She started using phrases like guidelines and common aesthetic. She told me not to take it personally when she voted against the repainting of my shutters. Too bold, she said. The tone of red disturbs the harmony of the block. I reminded her I was colorblind. She laughed, then leaned in and whispered, "Well then, at least you won't have to look at them." Somehow the rules grew teeth. The newsletters became mandates. The board meetings started to feel like church mixed with litigation. I stopped attending. But Diane didn't. She rose fast. By year 2, she was HOA president. And in Greendale Crossing, that meant more than mayor, judge, and sheriff combined. And yet, through it all, we still spoke. Sometimes. She still waved on Sundays. Still borrowed clippers. But something had changed. Her voice was more clipped. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I tried to ignore it. I told myself people evolve. Power just made her a little sharper. That was all. Then came the lawn chair. I had built a small memorial under the maple tree in my backyard. A simple stone bench, a plaque, and one folding chair I used to sit and talk to Margaret, even if only in my head. No one could see it from the street. It was under the tree where we used to have tea on fall mornings. That corner was sacred to me, untouched by rules or judgment. Until a letter came. Not signed, just stamped. Violation notice #742B. Unauthorized structure, bench and chair. Must be removed in 7 business days to comply with visual unity regulations per Article 6, Section 2. I brought the letter to Diane. I thought she'd explain. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone new on the board didn't know. She looked at it, then looked at me like I'd asked to plant a circus tent in my driveway. "It's not personal, Walt," she said. "The rules apply to everyone. Even you." But Margaret loved that tree. I said quietly. And now she's buried under it. Diane blinked. For a moment, her mouth trembled, and I thought, maybe. But then she put on her president's voice. We can't make exceptions. Not if we want to keep this neighborhood balanced. Balanced. A word that once meant harmony now sounded like a threat. I said nothing. Took the paper. Walked away. That night, I didn't sit on the chair. I sat on the cold ground. And I wondered, when did community become compliance? When did a woman who once brought me green bean casserole start citing codes instead of condolences? Maybe you think I should have fought back, called a lawyer, rallied other residents. But I didn't. Not then. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was stunned. Like someone had swapped out the floorboards of my home while I was sleeping. I realized then, the enemy wasn't just the rule. It was the tone in which it was delivered. It was the face behind it, the face that once smiled across the fence, now frozen under the weight of regulation. And so I did the one thing the handbook didn't expect. I bought concrete, hired a contractor, built a wall. Not just any wall. A tall, gray, unpainted slab of defiance, 6 feet high, right on the edge of my property line. It didn't block sunlight, didn't interfere with traffic, but it did one thing: it made Diane look. Made her pause. Made her remember, perhaps, that this place wasn't just hers to govern. But that's not where this story ends. That's where it begins. Because here's the thing no one tells you about fences. They don't just keep people out. Sometimes they trap everything in. She didn't knock anymore. Not for the clippers. Not for anything. After the wall went up, Diane walked her little white dog a different route. Half a block longer, slightly uphill, but far from the sight of the concrete monolith that now dissected our cul-de-sac like a scar. She called it the obstruction during the next HOA meeting. I called it a line. Not just of property, but of patience. And everyone had crossed it. They said I was dramatic. Said grief had finally gotten to my head. But they didn't hear the silence that grew between fence slats. They didn't watch a friend become a bureaucrat with a clipboard. Have you ever had someone erase history with a smile and call it order? The letter came 3 days after the wall dried. Notice of fine, $100 per day until non-compliant structure is removed. No appeal. No hearing. Just a bolded paragraph in Times New Roman signed by HOA Enforcement Committee. A title that now sounded like the civilian wing of a dystopian novel. I didn't pay it. I didn't even touch the envelope. Just left it on the bench under the maple tree, where the wind blew it across Margaret's plaque, the ink smearing like an accusation melting back into the earth. They'd gone too far. And Diane? She didn't even try to explain. Not in person. Not over the phone. Instead, she sent her words through official memos and group announcements. We must uphold the values of Greendale Crossing. What values? Compliance? Homogeneity? Fear? What they didn't expect, what she didn't expect, was for others to start noticing. It started with Eddie, the teenager next door with a skateboard and a pink-dyed rat tail. He knocked on my door one afternoon, holding a screwdriver and a sandwich. That wall's badass, he said. My mom hates it. So like, right on. He stayed on my porch for 2 hours. Didn't say much. Just sat. That was new. Then came the Silvas, the Brazilian family at the end of the street, who never got invited to potlucks, but always waved at everyone anyway. They started leaving oranges and plantains by my mailbox. Didn't say a word. Just small gestures like whispers of solidarity. I began to realize something Diane hadn't. People weren't afraid of the wall. They were afraid of what came before it. 2 weeks later, the HOA doubled the fine. $200 per day. They posted a public notice on the community bulletin board with my name in capital letters, like a wanted poster. That night, someone egged my front porch. Not a teenager. No laughter. Just 3 eggs, perfectly spaced. Quiet rage. I cleaned it up before sunrise. Diane didn't call. Didn't stop by. But I knew it was her signal, back down. You're alone. But I wasn't. Not anymore. At the next HOA meeting I went. First time in 3 years. People turned when I entered. You'd think I'd brought in a bomb instead of a clipboard. I didn't say much, just read the code back to them. Section 7, Article 4. Any structure within personal property lines that does not obstruct public utility access or violate noise, height, or zoning ordinances may be permitted upon review. I paused. But there was no review. No hearing. No vote. Just fines. The room went still. Even Diane didn't interrupt. She just adjusted her glasses and pretended to take notes. I walked out before they could respond. Let silence do the work. The next morning, 2 more homes had signs in the yard. Due process for all. That week, I got a new letter. Not from the HOA. From a neighbor I'd never met, Tom Reynolds, a retired Air Force colonel who lived 4 houses down and had never spoken more than 2 words to me. Dear Walt, it began. I may not agree with how you did it, but I agree with why. Rules are only fair if we all get a say. Enclosed was a form, petition to review HOA bylaws. It had 10 signatures already. By the end of the month, there were 38. Diane was furious. I could tell by the way she held her clipboard tighter at the next board meeting, the way she pronounced each line item like it was being etched into marble. She didn't speak to me directly, but her words were daggers thrown in a crowded room. There has been a troubling rise in resistance to structure, she said, and the board must remain vigilant. Resistance. Vigilant. Like we were rebels, and she the commander of some suburban militia. Then came the zoning inspector. They sent him anonymously. But we all knew. Tall guy, mustache like a worn-out broom, clip-on badge. He walked around my property with a tape measure and a GoPro strapped to his chest. Just documenting, he said. When he asked if he could enter the backyard, I told him he'd need a warrant. He left a flyer instead, outlining county protocols. But no violations were found. I had followed every rule. I had studied that HOA booklet like it was the Constitution. And in a way it was a flawed small-town version of governance, crafted by retirees with too much time and not enough empathy. And Diane had become its most faithful executioner. Around this time, Diane's dog died. I heard it before I saw it. One morning, no leash. Just her, walking slower than usual, her hands fidgeting with the air like she didn't know where to rest them. I watched from the porch. She didn't wave. Didn't even look up. Just kept walking. I should have said something. I wanted to. But instead, I stared at the spot where her dog used to pee on my mailbox and wondered if she cried at night. That was the problem, wasn't it? We only saw each other through policy and posture, not pain. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. Her daughter returned. Melissa, last seen during the Obama years, had married a Hispanic man and moved to San Antonio, supposedly cutting ties with Diane after a fallout over race and politics. But now, here she was, walking up to my porch with a mason jar full of lemonade. My mother won't talk to me, she said. But I saw the wall. I saw the minutes. I read everything. She sat down without asking. She used to be brave, you know. Protests in the 70s. Civil rights marches. She taught me to fight. Now she finds people for wind chimes. We sat in silence for a long time. Then she asked something I hadn't expected. Do you think she's scared? I hadn't thought of it that way. But maybe. Maybe power was just fear dressed in rules. Maybe order was her last defense against the world she didn't understand anymore. 2 days later, a new notice appeared in every mailbox. Community Review Forum Special Session. It was the first time in HOA history they'd called an open review of leadership policies. Diane didn't sign it. But Melissa had spoken during the last closed meeting. And the signatures had reached 52. More than half the homes. I didn't attend that session. I sat on the bench under Margaret's tree and listened. Through the wall, I could hear voices rise and fall like a chorus learning its first song. They debated. They questioned. And in the end they voted. Diane stepped down. No applause. No farewell. Just silence. That night I heard knocking. 3 soft taps on the wall. I stood, walked to the edge of the yard and listened. Then a voice frail cracked familiar. Walt. I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't answer. Not then. But I sat. And for the first time in months, the bench didn't feel like a battlefield. You ever wonder if fences keep the bad out, or keep the broken in? Because in that moment, I realized something no rulebook ever taught me. Forgiveness is harder than defiance. But maybe, just maybe, it's the only way the wall comes down. It was the rain that made me listen. Not the vote. Not the forum. Not even the knocking on the wall from Diane's side. Just the sound of rain against concrete. A low, steady tapping, like regret had taken physical form. I sat outside that night, wrapped in Margaret's old cardigan, the one with the elbow patches and the smell of lavender that refused to fade, and I watched the raindrops trace paths down the unpainted face of the wall. Each drop hit and vanished, like every conversation we never had, every fence we never meant to build. That was the night I started talking to her again. Not Diane, not yet, but to the ghost of something we used to be. Neighbors before enforcers, people before politics. The next morning, I walked to the wall with a paintbrush. I didn't paint over it. I painted on it. Just one line, blue like a river. I didn't know why. Maybe because rivers cut through stone. Maybe because I needed to mark the beginning of something again. That afternoon, 2 kids from the Silva family came by with chalk. They added fish. Then stars. By the weekend, half the wall was a mural. No permission slips. No signatures. Just color. A riot of it. People started coming by. Some left notes. Some stood in silence. A few shook my hand. One man cried. I knew Diane had seen it. She didn't say anything, but I caught her standing at the edge of her driveway twice, her hands clutching her coat like she was holding back a wave. Then came the letter, not from the HOA, not this time, but from Diane herself. A real letter. Handwritten. Delivered by Melissa, who refused to meet my eyes when she passed it through the gate. Walt, it began. I thought I was preserving something. I thought the rules kept us safe. But I forgot what they cost. I forgot that fences don't always protect. Sometimes they isolate. I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. But I do hope for conversation. Diane. I read it 3 times. Then once more in the middle of the night. I didn't write back. I built a door. It wasn't much. Just a cut into the wall, framed with cedar and painted yellow. No lock. No handle. Just a space. An invitation. I left it open. For a week, no one passed through. Then one morning, just as I was watering the grass, I looked up and saw her, on the other side, holding 2 mugs of coffee like peace offerings. She didn't speak. Neither did I. She just stepped through the door, sat on the bench, and handed me a cup. It was cold. Too much milk. But I drank it anyway. We didn't talk about the wall. Not at first. We talked about her dog. About Margaret's hydrangeas. About how strange it felt to be 70, and still capable of breaking your own heart. Slowly, the words grew braver. She told me about the power. How it had crept into her like a drug, soothing, affirming. How easy it was to mistake fear for responsibility. I told her about the loneliness. The kind that hums in empty hallways and echoes in morning routines. We spoke like survivors. Of a war we accidentally started. But not everyone was ready for peace. That same week, a new HOA board was formed, young, progressive, eager to rebrand. They launched a newsletter called the Greendale Pulse. It was modern, optimistic, full of pictures. On page 3, they featured the wall. Called it the Bridge Project. Quoted me. Quoted Diane. Painted us as heroes of healing. But healing isn't linear. And not everyone wanted their story rewritten. 3 days later, someone tagged the mural with red spray paint. One word, frauds. Diane found it first. She tried to scrub it off before I saw. But I did. I saw her crying in the rain, a bucket of soap beside her, her hands red from scrubbing brick that wouldn't forget. I didn't stop her. I just picked up another brush and started again. Over the next few days, people added new layers. Over the vandalism came trees. Over the word frauds came friends. The wall became a palimpsest. A record of conflict, apology, resilience. That's when the news crew showed up. Channel 4, local interest segment. A pretty reporter with perfect hair asked if she could film us reconciling. I almost laughed. We weren't a Hallmark special. But Diane said yes. She stood beside me, awkward, hands folded, and told the camera we were proof that neighborhoods could heal. I didn't say much. Just nodded. But inside, I knew healing wasn't the same as forgetting. And we weren't finished yet. 2 weeks later, during the community picnic, Diane approached the microphone. It was the first time she'd spoken publicly since stepping down. She looked older, softer. She didn't read from notes. She just spoke. Told the story of the Clippers. Of Margaret. Of the bench. Of the way power had made her afraid to listen. People clapped. Some stood. I didn't. I just closed my eyes and listened to her voice, finally stripped of its armor. After the speech, a boy, maybe 12, asked if he could add something to the wall. I handed him a brush. He painted a ladder. It reached from the bottom to the top, and at the top, he drew 2 hands touching. That night, Diane and I shared wine on my porch. She told me she was leaving, moving to Oregon, where Melissa had bought a small house with room for a garden. I nodded. Didn't argue. Some things end quietly. Like summers. Like silence between friends. Before she left, she gave me the clippers. Wrapped in newspaper. Still sharp. Still mine. And the wall. We didn't take it down. We opened it. Left the door wide. Added another one on the other side, so it became a walkthrough. A path. Children ran through it. Teenagers posed beside it. Old men touched the painted bricks like they were reading Braille. We called it a monument to misunderstanding. But I think it was more than that. It was proof that even in the quietest neighborhoods with the quietest people, storms can come. And if you're lucky, if you listen, something stronger can grow in their wake. You ever wonder what your neighborhood would say if it could speak? Mine would whisper, build walls if you must, but never forget the door. They called it the Bridge Wall in the city's quarterly newsletter, like some accidental monument we'd designed on purpose. What began as concrete resistance had turned into the town's latest attraction. I watched strangers take photos of the mural through car windows, watched children trace the colors with chalky fingers, and elderly couples sit on the bench beneath the maple tree, like it belonged to everyone now. There was even talk about registering it as a community art site, which made me laugh out loud the first time I heard it. If they only knew it had started because a man missed his wife and a woman lost her grip on control. Funny how grief and power, when pressed long enough, can become art. Diane had been gone for 3 weeks. Her house sat still, blinds drawn, the garden slowly returning to wild. Melissa had hired a local couple to maintain it, but they came once a week at best, more out of obligation than care. The silence next door was different now, less combative, more nostalgic. I didn't realize how used to her presence I'd become until it vanished completely. The coffee on my porch didn't taste the same without her awkward small talk. I found myself talking to the wall again, not for answers but out of habit. I told it about the birds, the newspaper headlines, the squirrels that kept stealing my tulip bulbs. I told it I missed her. That part surprised me. Because I did. Then came the envelope. It was tucked into my mailbox without a return address, but I recognized the handwriting, sharp, deliberate, slightly slanted. Inside was a photograph. Diane, standing in front of a small white house with a tin roof and a picket fence overgrown with ivy. She held a watering can, smiling. Underneath, 2 words, still blooming. I stared at that photo longer than I'd like to admit. Set it on the mantle. Sometimes I'd talk to that too. But life doesn't pause just because memory lingers. The new HOA board had plans, big ones. Greendale Crossing was undergoing a community rebrand. More inclusive language. Monthly events. Open voting on amendments. And then came the bombshell. The bylaws were to be rewritten entirely. I was asked to chair the transition committee. Me, the man they once fined into submission. I hesitated. At first. But something in me knew this was the next step. Not revenge, not redemption, but restoration. I said yes. The first meeting was held in the community center, same place where Diane once stood at the podium wielding the phrase visual unity like a gavel. But now it was different. Folding chairs in a circle. No table between us. People spoke openly, even nervously. A young woman named Priya voiced concern about renters being excluded from decisions. An older man named Carl, who had once voted to have my mailbox repainted, apologized for the way things had escalated. We were awkward, human, honest, and it was beautiful. Over the next month, I helped rewrite every page of those bylaws. We stripped the language of its passive aggression. We built in clauses for art, personal expression, grief allowances. Yes, grief. Clause 7.3. Residents experiencing bereavement may request temporary exemptions for memorial spaces or symbols for up to 6 months. I fought for that one. Not because I needed it anymore, but because someone would. But then came the vote. Community-wide. Paper ballots. 76 homes. A 2/3 majority needed for ratification. The night before the count, I barely slept. Pacing. Thinking of Diane. Of the first letter I received from the HOA. Of Margaret, and the bench under the maple tree, now surrounded by wildflowers planted by children during the spring fair. I wondered what she'd say about all this. I hoped she'd be proud. When the numbers came in, they read them out loud. 69 in favor, 7 against. The room erupted. Some clapped. Others cried. I just closed my eyes and exhaled. It was done. The old rules, the old rigidity, it was over. And in its place stood something we had made together. Not perfect, but alive. The mural was expanded that week. The kids added a river running through it now, with little bridges connecting both sides. Someone painted a silhouette of a woman holding clippers, and next to her, a man with a watering can. They didn't ask for permission. They didn't need to. That was the point. One evening, Melissa returned. I saw her unlocking Diane's front door, carrying a small suitcase and a potted plant. I walked over slowly, unsure if she wanted to see me. But she turned and smiled. She wanted me to bring this to you, she said, handing me a small box. Inside was the plaque from under the maple tree, the original one, now cleaned and polished. I ran my fingers over Margaret's name. She thought it should be protected from the weather, Melissa added. She didn't want it to fade. We talked on the porch that night. She told me about Oregon, about how Diane was volunteering at a community garden, about how she read the new bylaws and cried. She said she never thought the rules could be rewritten, Melissa said. But maybe they were never rules. Maybe they were just fears pretending to be policies. After she left, I didn't go inside. I sat by the mural, watched as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows that danced across the painted bricks. I thought about how close we had come to losing each other. Not just Diane and I, but all of us. How easily fear can become structure. How quickly silence can become law. But also, how miraculously stubbornly people can change. The next morning, I installed the plaque on a wooden post beside the bench. Not hidden, not guarded, just there, open, like the wall, like the door, like the possibility that maybe, just maybe, if we keep listening, we'll keep building something worth passing down. Have you ever seen a neighborhood breathe? I have. It was on the first truly hot day of summer that the letter arrived. Not in an envelope this time, not typed or formatted with headers and bullet points, but folded by hand and slipped beneath my front door. The handwriting was unmistakably Diane's, but the paper smelled like soil and rosemary, the way her garden used to on mornings before HOA meetings took that from her. I unfolded it slowly, half expecting instructions or apologies. But it was only one sentence, written in thick blue ink. They asked me to speak at the town hall. You should be there, Walt. That was all. No pleasantries. No signature. Just the implication that even after everything, there was one more door to walk through. I hadn't been to the town hall since Margaret passed. The last time I sat in its creaky wooden chairs was for her zoning appeal, the one that allowed her to teach private piano lessons out of our home before retirement. It had smelled of dust and wax then, and it still did now. I arrived early, sat in the back. No one noticed me at first, and I preferred it that way. The room filled slowly, HOA members, city officials, young families, retirees, people from the neighborhoods we never used to speak to. And then Diane walked in. Her hair was shorter now, silver and clean, her shoulders no longer burdened by clipboards or consequence. She didn't wear a name tag. She didn't need one. When she took the stage, the room fell into a silence so complete I could hear the old ceiling fan wobbling above us like a hesitant thought. She didn't use notes. She didn't clear her throat. She just looked up and spoke in that calm, slow voice of hers, the one that used to tell children to line up for recess and, years later, told me my shutters were too red. But now it was different. I used to believe that order was the highest good, she began. That harmony could only come from sameness. I thought rules protected people. What I didn't see was who those rules were protecting, and who they were quietly erasing. There were murmurs. A few people shifted in their seats. She went on. I made mistakes. I confused authority with wisdom. I confused fear with leadership. And in doing so, I hurt people I cared about. She looked up then, across the room, eyes scanning until they found mine. I hurt a friend. And if he hadn't built a wall, I might never have seen the one I had already built between us. I didn't know what to do with my hands. I kept them folded, but my fingers trembled slightly, a ripple under still water. The room didn't applaud. It didn't need to. Some truths land softly and still shake the ground. After the speech, there was no procession, no fanfare. Just people returning to their lives. But something in the air had shifted. I walked home alone, under the late summer sun, and found the wall waiting for me like a quiet witness. The mural was brighter now, retouched by local art students who had asked if they could add to it during their community service week. I'd said yes, of course. What else was there to say? That night, I sat on the bench and stared at the plaque beside it, now surrounded by a circle of painted hands. Children's handprints in red, green, blue, and gold, reaching outward like petals. A boy passed by with his father, stopped to point. That's the peace wall, right? He asked. The father nodded. They say it used to be a fight wall, but then people changed. And I realized, with a quiet sort of awe, that we had become a story. Not a warning. Not a scandal. A parable. One people told their children when teaching them about listening, about standing, about how hard it is to love your neighbor, and still do it anyway. 3 days later, I received an invitation. The city council was dedicating a new initiative, Community Autonomy and Listening Zones, CLZ. They wanted the bridge wall to be its symbolic anchor. Not a monument, they clarified, but a living site, open to new additions each year. We want it to breathe, the letter said. We want it to grow like the people who made it possible. I sat with that letter for hours. Reread it until the edges curled under my thumbs. Then I called Melissa. She answered on the second ring. I hadn't spoken to her since she brought the plaque. We talked for almost an hour. I asked how Diane was settling in, if the garden took root. She laughed. Apparently Diane had become a fixture at the local community center, running a program that paired retirees with high school students for collaborative art projects. She says it's the first time she's felt useful in years, Melissa said. And I think she's happy. That word, happy, hung in the air between us for a long moment. I hadn't used it in years, not with conviction. But now it didn't sound like a wish. It sounded like a possibility. On the day of the dedication, I wore Margaret's old sun hat. Not because I needed shade, but because she always said it made me look less serious. People gathered around the wall, smiling, some holding hands. One woman wore a shirt that read, "Compassion is contagious." A boy carried a balloon with the words, "My community listens." A podium had been set up, though no one really used it. Instead, speakers came forward like friends at a wake, sharing memories of the change, the tension, the thaw. When they asked me to say something, I didn't prepare. I just stood and told the truth. This wall wasn't supposed to be anything. It was anger, poured in concrete. It was grief without a direction. It was a man trying to hold on to his wife, and a neighbor trying not to lose control. But it became something else, because people stopped being afraid to talk. And more importantly, they stopped being afraid to listen. I paused. We didn't tear the wall down. We opened it, and sometimes that's all it takes. Later, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the grass, I stood in front of the wall alone. A girl tugged her mother's sleeve nearby and asked, "Who built it?" The mother pointed. "Him. And someone else." They didn't like each other at first, but then they did. I smiled. A strange, aching warmth bloomed in my chest. If that's how we were remembered, I could live with it. That evening, I received a voicemail. Diane's voice, slightly crackly through the receiver, but unmistakably hers. Walt, she said, I saw the pictures. Melissa sent them. You looked ridiculous in that hat. Margaret would have loved it. I'm thinking of visiting this fall. Maybe we could sit on the bench. Catch up. If you're not too busy being famous. I played that voicemail 3 times. Then I deleted it. Not because I didn't want to keep it, but because I didn't need a recording. I had the wall. I had the mural. I had the handprints and the river and the ladder and the plaque. I had the door always open. I had the story, the kind that lives in soil and sidewalk and sky. You ever wonder what forgiveness looks like when no one claps? It looks like a neighbor stepping through a doorway with coffee. Like a wall painted by strangers who knew neither side. Like a boy pointing at bricks and seeing hope. It looks like home. Finally again.